The control tower's voice crackled through the static. Lightning 7-7. You are cleared for emergency landing. Winds gusting to 70 knots. Visibility near zero. We're standing by. Captain Sarah Chen's grip tightened on the flight stick as her damaged F-16 Fighting Falcon bucked and rolled through the storm-ravaged sky. Oil pressure dropping, hydraulics failing, and now she was flying blind through what meteorologists would later call the worst storm system to hit the region in decades. The voices of her instructors echoed in her mind from years ago. She crack under pressure. Women don't have what it takes for high-stress combat situations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tonight, those words would be proven catastrophically wrong. But let's start from the beginning, because Sarah Chen's journey to this moment began long before she ever set foot in a cockpit. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, Sarah had always been fascinated by aircraft. While other kids played with dolls or video games, she was building model planes and studying aviation magazines. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, would take her to work on weekends, where she'd watch planes take off and land with wide-eyed wonder. "Dad, I want to fly those someday," she'd tell him, pointing at the sleek jets that occasionally stopped for fuel. Her father would smile and ruffle her hair, never imagining that his daughter would one day become one of the most skilled pilots in the Air Force. But the path wasn't easy. When Sarah announced her intention to join the military and become a pilot, the reactions were mixed at best. Her high school guidance counselor pulled her aside one day, suggesting she consider more practical career options. "The military is changing," he said, "but flying fighter jets is still very much a man's world. Maybe you should think about nursing or teaching." Even some of her family members expressed doubts. Her uncle, a Vietnam veteran, meant well when he said, "Sarah, honey, combat flying requires split-second decisions and nerves of steel. It's not that women can't do it, but the stress levels are unlike anything you can imagine." But Sarah had already made up her mind. She excelled in high school physics and mathematics, earning a scholarship to the Air Force Academy. The Academy was her first real taste of the challenges she'd face as a woman in military aviation. The physical demands were intense, but Sarah thrived on the challenge. She could outrun most of her male classmates, and her academic performance was consistently in the top 5% of her class. It was during her second year at the Academy that she first encountered Major Rebecca Torres, one of the few female fighter pilots at the time. Major Torres was guest lecturing about air-to-air combat tactics, and Sarah was mesmerized. Here was a woman who had not only broken through the barriers, but had excelled in one of the most demanding roles in the military. After the lecture, Sarah approached her. "Ma'am, I want to do what you do. I want to fly fighters." Major Torres studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It won't be easy, Cadet Chen. You'll face opposition from people who should be supporting you. You'll question yourself more than you should. But if you're truly committed, if you can handle the pressure and prove yourself every single day, then yes, you can do this." Those words became Sarah's mantra throughout her academy years. She graduated third in her class and was selected for pilot training. Flight school was where the real challenges began. The physical demands of high-G maneuvers, the complex aircraft systems, the navigation challenges, all of it came naturally to Sarah. But it was the psychological pressure that proved most difficult to overcome. Her flight instructors, while professional, weren't shy about expressing their doubts. "Chen's technically proficient," she overheard one instructor telling another, "but I'm not sure she has the killer instinct needed for air-to-air combat. When the pressure's really on, when lives are at stake, will she fold?" Another instructor was more direct. "She's good in training scenarios, but combat is different. The stress, the adrenaline, the life or death decisions, that's where we'll see if she really has what it takes." Sarah channeled these doubts into determination. She spent extra hours in the simulator, practiced emergency procedures until they became second nature, and studied aircraft systems manuals late into the night. Her dedication paid off when she graduated at the top of her flight school class and was selected for F-16 training. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was known as the Viper among pilots, a single-seat, multi-role fighter that demanded split-second decision-making and exceptional flying skills. F-16 training was the most intense period of Sarah's life. The aircraft was incredibly responsive, capable of pulling 9 gigaseconds in a tight turn, and required constant attention from the pilot. Unlike larger aircraft with multiple crew members, the F-16 pilot was alone in the cockpit, responsible for navigation, weapons systems, communications, and flying the aircraft simultaneously. The instructors pushed every student to their limits, but Sarah felt the scrutiny more acutely than most. "She's technically sound," her primary instructor, Colonel Martinez, noted in one evaluation, "but I'm still not convinced she handle the stress of actual combat." Training scenarios are one thing, but when the bullets start flying, when she's making decisions that could mean life or death for ground troops or fellow pilots, that's when we'll see her true character. Sarah's first assignment after earning her wings was to the 421st Fighter Squadron. Based at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, the squadron had a proud heritage, having served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But Sarah was only the second woman ever assigned to the unit. The reception was polite but cool. She was the outsider, the one who had to prove herself all over again. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Sullivan, was a decorated veteran with over 3,000 flight hours in the F-16. He was fair but demanding, and he made it clear that Sarah would receive no special treatment. "Chen," he told her during their first meeting, "you're here because you've demonstrated you can fly. But flying in peacetime training and flying in combat are two completely different things. Your squadron mates' lives may depend on your decisions someday. I need to know you won't crack when the pressure's on." The other pilots in the squadron were a mix of personalities and experience levels. Some, like Captain Mike "Bulldog" Morrison, were welcoming and supportive. Bulldog was a 10-year veteran who had flown combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. He took Sarah under his wing, sharing insights about air-to-ground operations and survival tactics. "Don't let the old-timers get to you," he advised her. "You've earned your place here. Now you just need to prove it every day." Others were less supportive. Major Rick "Viper" Daniels, a squadron veteran with a reputation for aggressive flying, made no secret of his doubts. "Nothing personal, Chen," he told her after her first training flight. "But when I'm flying wing position, I need to know my flight lead won't hesitate when things get tough. Women are naturally more cautious, more emotional. That's not necessarily bad, but it's not what you want in a dogfight." Sarah's response was to let her flying do the talking. She threw herself into training with an intensity that impressed even her critics. She mastered air-to-air combat maneuvers, excelled in ground attack missions, and demonstrated exceptional skill in formation flying. Her knowledge of aircraft systems was encyclopedic, and her emergency procedures were flawless. Slowly, she began to earn the respect of her squadron mates. The turning point came during a particularly challenging training exercise. The scenario involved a simulated attack on a heavily defended target, with Sarah leading a 4-ship formation of F-16s. The mission required precise timing, coordination with other aircraft, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions. As they approached the target area, the exercise controllers threw them a curveball, simulated surface-to-air. Missiles were being fired at the formation. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She called for evasive maneuvers, coordinated the formation's defensive actions, and still managed to deliver her ordnance on target. Her wingmen followed her lead perfectly, and the mission was completed successfully. After landing, Major Daniels approached her with a grudging smile. "Nice flying, Chen. You kept your head when things got complicated. Maybe you do have what it takes after all." But Sarah knew that training exercises, no matter how realistic, were still just training. The real test would come when she faced actual combat. That opportunity came sooner than expected when tensions escalated in Eastern Europe. The squadron was deployed to Aviano Air Base in Italy as part of a NATO rapid response force. The mission was to provide air support for peacekeeping operations and to maintain air superiority over the region. Sarah's first combat mission was a routine patrol over the Adriatic Sea. She flew as wingman to Captain Morrison, maintaining radio silence as they swept the area for any signs of hostile activity. The mission was uneventful, but Sarah felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't a training exercise. Any contact with enemy aircraft would have real consequences. Over the following weeks, Sarah flew dozens of combat missions. She provided close air support for ground troops, escorted transport aircraft, and participated in air-to-air patrols. Her performance was exemplary, and she quickly gained a reputation as one of the squadron's most reliable pilots. Her call sign, Phoenix, was chosen partly for her ability to rise from the ashes of early criticism and partly for her remarkable skill at emergency recovery procedures. It was during her third month of deployment that Sarah faced her first real crisis. She was flying a night mission over mountainous terrain when her aircraft developed a hydraulic problem. The F-16's flight controls became increasingly difficult to manage, and warning lights began flashing across her instrument panel. The nearest airfield was 200 miles away, and the weather was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She diagnosed the problem, executed emergency procedures, and managed to nurse the damaged aircraft back to base. The landing was textbook perfect, despite the challenging conditions. Her squadron mates were impressed, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Real emergencies, the kind that would truly test her skills and resolve, were still to come. Colonel Sullivan called her into his office the next day. "Chen," he said, "I've been watching your performance closely. You've exceeded every expectation I had when you joined this squadron. Your technical skills are outstanding, your decision-making is sound, and your composure under pressure is remarkable. I'm recommending you for upgrading to flight lead status." Flight lead was a significant responsibility. It meant being responsible not just for her own aircraft, but for the entire formation. It meant making split-second decisions that could affect the lives of other pilots. It was recognition that Sarah had truly earned her place among the squadron's elite pilots. The promotion to flight lead came with new challenges and responsibilities. Sarah now found herself planning complex missions, briefing other pilots, and making tactical decisions that could affect the outcome of operations. She took the responsibility seriously, spending hours studying intelligence reports, weather patterns, and enemy capabilities. Her fellow pilots noticed the change in her demeanor. She had evolved from the eager newcomer trying to prove herself into a confident leader. Her first mission as flight lead was a complex air-to-ground operation targeting enemy supply lines. Sarah led a 6-ship formation of F-16s, coordinating with AWACS controllers, refueling tankers, and ground support teams. The mission required precise timing and flawless execution. As they approached the target area, enemy surface-to-air missiles began tracking them. "Phoenix flight, this is Phoenix 1, Sarah called over the radio. "SAMs are active. Execute defensive maneuvers, pattern Delta." The formation split according to predetermined plans, with each aircraft taking evasive action while maintaining the ability to deliver their ordnance. Sarah's calm, professional voice guided the formation through the dangerous airspace, and all aircraft successfully completed their attacks and returned to base. The mission's success further cemented Sarah's reputation within the squadron. Even Major Daniels, who had initially been skeptical, now spoke of her with genuine respect. "Chun's got ice water in her veins," he told other pilots. "She doesn't panic, doesn't rush decisions, and she always looks out for her wingmen. That's the kind of pilot you want leading your formation." But Sarah's greatest test was yet to come. It began as a routine training flight on a gray March afternoon. The weather forecast called for scattered thunderstorms, but nothing that would. Normally ground aircraft. Sarah was scheduled to fly a practice intercept mission with her wingman, Lieutenant Tommy "Rookie" Patterson, a recent addition to the squadron who looked up to Sarah as a mentor. The mission briefing was straightforward. They would practice air-to-air interceptions against simulated enemy aircraft, flown by other squadron members. The exercise was designed to test reaction times, tactical decision-making, and formation flying skills. Sarah had flown similar missions hundreds of times, but she always approached each flight with the same level of preparation and professionalism. As they prepared for takeoff, Sarah noticed the weather conditions were deteriorating faster than predicted. The wind was picking up, and dark clouds were building on the horizon. She considered postponing the mission, but the forecast still showed acceptable conditions for the planned exercise area. The decision to proceed would later be analyzed and debated, but at the time it seemed reasonable. "Rookie, you ready for this?" Sarah asked over the intercom as they taxied to the runway. Lieutenant Patterson's voice came back excited and confident. "Ready as I'll ever be, Phoenix. Let's show them what we can do." Sarah smiled beneath her oxygen mask. She remembered having that same enthusiasm during her early days in the squadron. The takeoff was routine, and they climbed to their assigned altitude of 25,000 feet. The exercise area was about 50 miles from base, over sparsely populated terrain. That provided a safe environment for air-to-air combat training. As they approached the area, Sarah noticed the weather conditions were changing more rapidly than expected. The scattered thunderstorms were intensifying and beginning to merge into a larger system. "Tower, this is Phoenix 1, Sarah called. "Weather looks like it's building faster than forecast. Request updated conditions for the exercise area." The response came back with a hint of concern. "Phoenix 1, latest weather shows rapidly developing storm system. Recommend you consider returning to base." Sarah weighed her options. The mission was important training for both her and Lieutenant Patterson, but safety was always the top priority. She was about to call for a return to base when the exercise controller's voice crackled through the radio. "Phoenix Flight, your targets are airborne and approaching from the northwest. You are cleared to engage." The enemy aircraft were flown by experienced pilots from their own squadron, including Major Daniels and Captain Morrison. This was an opportunity for Sarah to demonstrate her tactical skills against some of the squadron's best pilots. The competitive instinct that had driven her throughout her career kicked in. "Rookie, stay close and follow my lead," Sarah instructed. "We're going to show these guys what we're made of." She banked the F-16 toward the intercept. "Point, scanning the skies for any sign of the opposing aircraft." The weather was still marginal but manageable, and Sarah decided to proceed with the exercise. The mock dogfight that followed was intense and challenging. Sarah's tactical skills were put to the test as she maneuvered her aircraft through complex aerial maneuvers, trying to gain position on the enemy fighters while avoiding their simulated weapons. Lieutenant Patterson flew perfectly as her wingman, staying in formation and following her instructions precisely. For 20 minutes, the four aircraft engaged in aerial combat that would have been impressive under any circumstances. Sarah managed to score simulated kills on both opposing aircraft, demonstrating the tactical skills and flying ability that had made her one of the squadron's most respected pilots. But as the exercise continued, the weather conditions continued to deteriorate. It was Major Daniels who first noticed the problem. "Phoenix 1, you might want to look at the weather to the south. That storm system is moving faster than predicted, and it's heading right for us." Sarah banked her aircraft to get a better view and felt her stomach drop. What had been scattered thunderstorms an hour ago was now a massive, rotating supercell that stretched across the horizon. All aircraft. This is Phoenix 1. Exercise terminated. We're returning to base immediately. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. But as they turned toward home, Sarah realized they might already be too late. The storm was moving faster than their aircraft could fly, and it was positioned directly between them and their base dot in that moment, staring at the wall of churning. Black clouds that blocked their path home. Sarah felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. 4 pilots, 4 multi-million-dollar aircraft, and a storm system that meteorologists would later describe as a once-in-a-decade weather event. The voices of her critics echoed in her mind. Shoe crack under pressure. But as she keyed her radio to address the formation, her voice was steady and controlled. What happened next would either validate every doubt ever expressed about her abilities, or silence them forever. That wall of churning black clouds Sarah was staring at wasn't just any storm system. It was about to become her greatest test as a pilot and leader. The storm system that now blocked their path home was unlike anything Sarah had encountered in her flying career. Meteorologists would later classify it as a derecho, a widespread, long-lived windstorm associated with bands of rapidly moving showers and thunderstorms. The system stretched for over 200 miles and was generating winds in excess of 100 miles per hour at ground level, with even stronger winds at altitude. Phoenix Flight, this is base operations, the radio crackled. Be advised, the storm system is tracking directly toward our location. We're seeing wind gusts up to 80 knots and rapidly deteriorating conditions. You need to find an alternate landing site immediately. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The nearest alternate airfield was over 300 miles away, and they didn't have enough fuel to reach it if they had to navigate around the storm system. Their only choice was to try to penetrate the storm and reach their home base before conditions became completely impossible. "Rookie, you still with me?" Sarah called to her wingman. Lieutenant Patterson's voice came back strained but determined. "Right behind you, Phoenix. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." The trust in his voice was both reassuring and terrifying. Sarah knew that her decisions in the next few minutes would determine whether both of them made it home alive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah made the decision to attempt penetration of the storm's outer bands. All aircraft, this is Phoenix 1. We're going to try to punch through the edge of the system. Stay tight, maintain formation, and be ready for severe turbulence. Major Daniels and Captain Morrison, flying the opposing aircraft, acknowledged and moved into a protective formation around the 2 younger pilots. The first indication of what they were about to face came as they approached the storm's outer edge. The F-16 began to buck and roll as they hit the turbulent air. Sarah had experienced rough weather before, but nothing like this. The aircraft was being tossed around like a toy, and she had to fight continuously to maintain control. "Phoenix 1, this is Tower. We're showing you approaching the storm at 25,000 feet. Recommend you descend to 15,000 to try to get below the worst of the turbulence." Sarah pushed the stick forward, beginning a rapid descent. The air was slightly smoother at lower altitude, but the visibility was dropping rapidly as they encountered the storm's precipitation. As they descended through 20,000 feet, Sarah felt a sharp jolt through the aircraft. "Phoenix 1, this is Phoenix 2, Lieutenant Patterson called, his voice tight with stress. "I'm showing a hydraulic warning light. System pressure is dropping." Sarah's heart sank. A hydraulic failure in an F-16 was a serious emergency under the best of circumstances. In the middle of a severe thunderstorm, it could be fatal. "Rookie, execute emergency procedures for hydraulic failure." Sarah instructed, trying to keep her voice calm and professional. "Can you maintain control of the aircraft?" Patterson's response came back after a tense pause. "Barely. The stick feels like it's fighting me, and I'm losing responsiveness in the flight controls." Sarah had to make a split-second decision. She could order Patterson to eject, which would save his life but mean the loss of an aircraft. Or she could try to guide him through the storm to a safe landing. The weather conditions made ejection extremely dangerous. The high winds and turbulence could easily cause a parachute to fail or carry a pilot into dangerous terrain. "Rookie, stay with me," Sarah decided. "I'm going to talk you through this. Follow my lead exactly, and we'll get you on the ground safely." She moved her aircraft into a protective position next to Patterson's damaged F-16, close enough to monitor his condition, but far enough away to avoid a collision if he lost control. The storm system seemed to be actively fighting their efforts to penetrate it. Lightning flashed continuously around them, and the turbulence was so severe that Sarah had to use both hands on the stick to maintain control. Her instruments were being affected by the electrical activity in the storm, with compass readings fluctuating wildly and radio communications becoming increasingly garbled. "Phoenix Flight, this is base operations," came a weak radio transmission. "Current conditions at base. Winds 070 at 65 knots. Gusts to 85, visibility 1/2 mile in heavy rain. Runway 07 is still available for emergency landing, but conditions are deteriorating rapidly." Sarah did quick calculations in her head. They were still 20 minutes from base, and Patterson's aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The hydraulic pressure was continuing to drop, and he was having to use emergency backup systems to maintain flight. Meanwhile, the storm was getting worse instead of better. "Phoenix 1, I'm losing altitude," Patterson called, his voice now showing clear signs of panic. "The controls are barely responding, and I'm having trouble maintaining level flight." Sarah looked over at his aircraft and could see it was indeed losing altitude, despite Patterson's efforts to maintain formation. "Rookie, listen to me carefully," Sarah said, her voice firm but reassuring. "You're going to be fine. I want you to reduce power slightly and let the aircraft settle into a shallow descent. Don't fight the controls, work with them. I'm going to stay right beside you and guide you home." What Sarah didn't tell Patterson was that she was beginning to experience problems with her own aircraft. The continuous turbulence and the electrical activity from the storm were causing intermittent failures in her navigation and communication systems. Her primary flight display was flickering, and she was having to rely increasingly on backup instruments. As they continued their desperate flight toward base, Sarah's mind flashed back to all the times she'd heard that she would crack under pressure. Her instructors, her fellow pilots, even some of her family members had expressed doubts about her ability to handle high-stress situations. Now, flying a damaged aircraft through the worst storm of her career while trying to keep her wingman alive, she was facing the ultimate test of those predictions. But instead of cracking, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm descending over her. All the hours of training, all the emergency procedures she'd practiced, all the scenarios she'd rehearsed, everything was coming together. Her voice remained steady as she guided Patterson through the storm, her hands sure on the controls. Despite the aircraft's violent movements, "Phoenix 1, this is Viper," Major Daniels called from somewhere behind them in the storm. "We've lost visual contact. How are you doing up there?" Sarah's response was immediate and confident. "We're managing, Viper. Stay clear and proceed to base. We'll be right behind you." The storm's fury seemed to intensify as they approached their home base. What had started as severe turbulence had evolved into something far more dangerous. The F-16s were being subjected to wind shear so severe that Sarah's aircraft was gaining and losing altitude by hundreds of feet without any input from her. Her airspeed indicator was fluctuating wildly, and she was having to constantly adjust power settings to maintain control. Phoenix 1, this is base operations. The radio crackled through heavy static. Be advised, we're now recording wind gusts in excess of 90 knots. We're considering closing the runway due to safety concerns. What's your fuel status? Sarah quickly scanned her fuel gauge. The continuous maneuvering through the storm had consumed fuel at an alarming rate. Base Phoenix 1, we have approximately 20 minutes of fuel remaining. We need to get on the ground now. We don't have enough fuel to divert to an alternate field. The situation was becoming desperate. Patterson's aircraft was now barely controllable, with hydraulic pressure continuing to drop. Sarah could see him struggling in the cockpit, using both hands on the stick to maintain even basic flight control. Meanwhile, her own aircraft was experiencing increasing electrical problems due to the storm's intense electromagnetic activity. Rookie, how are you holding up? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the growing crisis. Patterson's response came back strained and breathless. I'm losing it, Phoenix. The controls are barely responding, and I'm having trouble maintaining altitude. I don't know if I can make it to the runway. Sarah's mind raced through their options. They were still 10 minutes from base, flying through conditions that were pushing both aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. The smart thing to do would be to order Patterson to eject, but the storm conditions made that extremely dangerous. A parachute descent through winds of this intensity could be fatal. Rookie, listen to me, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of her years of training and experience. You're going to make it to the runway. I'm going to stay right here with you, and we're going to get through this together. Trust your training, trust your aircraft, and trust me. As they continued their approach to base, Sarah began to notice something troubling with her own aircraft. The continuous stress of flying through the storm was beginning to take its toll on her F-16 systems. Warning lights were beginning to illuminate on her instrument panel, and she was experiencing intermittent power fluctuations that suggested possible engine problems. Phoenix 1, this is Tower, came the call she'd been dreading. We're showing you on final approach, but we're having trouble maintaining radar contact due to the storm. Can you confirm your position and altitude? Sarah looked at her instruments and felt a chill run down her spine. Her primary navigation system had failed completely, and her backup GPS was showing erratic readings due to the storm's electromagnetic interference. She was essentially flying blind, trying to navigate by dead reckoning through one of the worst storms in the region's history. Tower, Phoenix 1, my navigation systems are compromised. I'm estimating 8 miles southwest of the field, descending through 8,000 feet. Can you provide vectors to the runway? The response came back weak and garbled. Phoenix 1, we're having difficulty. Communication, severe interference. Sarah realized she was on her own. The storm was now so intense that ground control couldn't provide reliable guidance, and her aircraft systems were failing one by one. She had to rely on her experience, her training, and her instincts to find the runway and get both aircraft safely on the ground. Rookie, we're going to have to do this the hard way, Sarah transmitted to Patterson. Follow my lead and don't worry about radio calls. We're going to find that runway and get you down safely. Patterson's response was barely audible through the static. I'm with you, Phoenix, whatever it takes. As they descended through 5,000 feet, Sarah caught a glimpse of lights through the storm. It was the runway approach lighting system, barely visible through the heavy rain and low clouds. She had found their home base, but the approach was going to be the most challenging landing of her career. The wind was now blowing directly across the runway at nearly 90 knots, with gusts that were strong enough to flip an aircraft if the pilot wasn't careful. Sarah would have to time the landing perfectly, using the momentary lulls between gusts to touch down safely. Meanwhile, Patterson would be attempting the same maneuver in an aircraft with severely compromised flight controls. Base operations. "This is Phoenix 1, Sarah called, hoping her transmission would get through. "We have the runway in sight and are beginning our approach. Be advised, Phoenix 2 is experiencing severe control problems and will require emergency equipment standing." "Bye." The response came back immediately. "Phoenix 1, emergency equipment is already positioned. You're cleared for emergency landing runway 7. Use extreme caution. Wind conditions are at the limits of safe operations." Sarah began her approach to the runway, fighting continuous turbulence and wind shear that threatened to slam her aircraft into the ground. The F-16 was being pushed around like a leaf in the wind, and she had to make constant corrections to maintain the proper flight path. Behind her, Patterson was struggling to maintain formation, his damaged aircraft barely responding to control. Inputs. As they descended through 1,000 feet, Sarah's own aircraft suffered a major systems failure. The engine began to surge and stutter, and warning lights flooded her instrument panel. She was now flying an aircraft that was as damaged as Patterson's, trying to guide both of them to safety through conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. "Phoenix 1, this is Tower," came an urgent transmission. "We're showing engine problems on your aircraft. Can you confirm your status?" Sarah's response was immediate and professional. "Tower, Phoenix 1. Confirm engine problems, but we're continuing the approach. We're committed now." The word "committed" had special meaning in aviation. It meant that the situation had progressed beyond the point where a safe go-around was possible. Sarah was telling the tower that she and Patterson were going to land, regardless of the conditions, because they had no other choice. But what Sarah didn't know was that her greatest challenge was still ahead. As they descended through the storm's fury toward the runway, both aircraft were about to face catastrophic failures that would push pilot and machine beyond their absolute limits. The next few minutes would determine whether Sarah Chen was truly the pilot she believed herself to be, or whether the critics had been right all along. At 500 feet above the runway, Sarah's engine quit completely. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the howling wind and the rain hammering against the canopy. She was now flying what pilots call a dead stick landing, trying to glide a damaged aircraft to the runway with no power and in the middle of a severe storm. "Phoenix 1, this is Tower," came the panicked transmission. "We show you've lost engine power. Do you want us to clear the runway for emergency equipment?" Sarah's response was calm and controlled, despite the desperate situation. "Negative. Tower, keep the runway clear. We're going to make this landing." The F-16 was not designed to glide. Unlike civilian aircraft, which could maintain controlled flight for extended periods without power, the F-16 had the gliding characteristics of a brick. Sarah had perhaps 2 minutes before the aircraft would stall and become uncontrollable. She had to get both herself and Patterson on the ground in that time. "Rookie, my engine's out," Sarah transmitted to Patterson. "I'm going in first. Follow me down, and don't worry about your hydraulics. Just get the aircraft on the ground." In one piece. Patterson's response came back tight with stress but determined. "Copy, Phoenix. I'm right behind you." Sarah began what would later be called one of the most skillful dead-stick landings in Air Force history. With no power, she had to manage her aircraft's energy carefully, using altitude and airspeed to maintain control. The storm was still battering the aircraft, and she had to compensate for wind gusts that were trying to push her off the runway, CENTERLINE. At 200 feet. A massive gust of wind caught her aircraft and pushed it toward the right side of the runway. Sarah used full left rudder and aileron to counter the wind, but the aircraft was still drifting dangerously close to the runway edge. She had one chance to correct the approach. If she missed the runway, there would be no opportunity for a second attempt. Come on," Sarah muttered to herself. fighting the controls with everything she had. The runway was rushing up toward her, and she could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the sides, their lights flashing in the storm. Ground personnel were watching what they knew could be a catastrophic crash at 50 feet. Sarah felt another massive wind gust, this one from the left. The aircraft was pushed back toward the runway centerline, but the sudden wind shift caused it to drop rapidly. She was coming in too fast and too steep, but there was no power to correct the approach. She would have to use every bit of skill and experience she had to prevent the aircraft from slamming into the runway. Sarah pulled back on the stick, trying to arrest the aircraft's descent without stalling it. The F-16 responded sluggishly, its flight controls mushy without the assistance of the engine-driven hydraulic pumps. She could feel the aircraft on the edge of a stall, but she managed to flare it just enough to cushion the impact. The touchdown was hard but controlled. Sarah's F-16 hit the runway with a jarring impact that threw her forward against her restraints, but the aircraft remained upright and on the center line. She immediately deployed the drag chute and applied maximum braking, fighting to stop the aircraft before it ran off the end of the runway. The F-16 finally came to a stop with less than 1,000 feet of runway remaining. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands shaking from the adrenaline and the physical strain of the landing. She had done it. She had successfully landed a powerless aircraft in the middle of a severe storm. But her mission wasn't complete yet. "Phoenix 2, this is Phoenix 1, Sarah called to Patterson. "I'm down safe. Now it's your turn. You can do this, rookie." "Just like we practiced." Patterson's response came back, strained but determined. "Copy, Phoenix. Beginning my approach now." Sarah quickly exited her aircraft and ran to the control tower, where she could monitor Patterson's approach and provide guidance. She watched through the rain-streaked windows as Patterson's damaged F-16 approached the runway, the aircraft wobbling and struggling as he fought to maintain control. "Rookie, you're looking good," Sarah transmitted, trying to keep her voice calm and encouraging. "Just keep it steady and get it on the ground. Don't worry about making it pretty, just get it down in one piece." Patterson's approach was erratic, with the aircraft gaining and losing altitude as he struggled with the failed hydraulics. At 100 feet, Patterson's aircraft suddenly pitched up violently as the hydraulic system failed completely. The F-16 stalled and began to fall toward the runway at a dangerous angle. Sarah watched in horror as the aircraft dropped like a stone, knowing that Patterson had only seconds to recover before impact. "Pull back, rookie, pull back." Sarah screamed into the radio, though she knew there was little Patterson could do with his failed controls. The aircraft hit the runway hard, bouncing once before slamming back down. The landing gear collapsed on impact, and the F-16 skidded down the runway in a shower of sparks. But Patterson had managed to keep the aircraft relatively straight, and it slid to a stop about halfway down the runway. Emergency vehicles immediately surrounded the aircraft, and Sarah could see Patterson moving in the cockpit. He was alive. The canopy popped open, and ground personnel helped him out of the cockpit. He was shaken but uninjured, having survived what should have been a fatal crash. Sarah ran out to meet Patterson as he was helped away from his destroyed aircraft. Despite everything they had been through, he managed a weak smile when he saw her. "Not exactly a textbook landing," he said, his voice still shaking from the experience. Sarah grabbed him in a fierce hug, the emotions of the past hour finally catching up with her. "You did great, rookie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You brought it home, and that's all that matters." Around them, the storm continued to rage, but both pilots were safe on the ground. They had survived one of the most challenging flights in Air Force history, and Sarah had proven once and for all that she would never crack under pressure. As they were debriefed by squadron personnel and medical teams, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. She had faced the ultimate test of her skills, courage, and leadership, and she had not only survived but had saved another pilot's life. In the process, the voices of doubt that had followed her throughout her career, the instructors who said she would fold under pressure, the fellow pilots who questioned her ability to handle combat stress, had all been silenced by her actions in the storm. The next few hours were a blur of medical examinations, technical debriefings, and incident reports. Both aircraft were total losses, but the human cost had been zero. Sarah's dead stick landing was already being discussed as a masterpiece of piloting skill, and Patterson's survival of the hydraulic failure was being called miraculous. Colonel Sullivan arrived at the base as soon as the storm allowed, and his first stop was to personally congratulate both pilots. "Chen," he said, shaking Sarah's hand, "what you did today was extraordinary. You saved Patterson's life, and you demonstrated the kind of leadership and skill that defines the best of our Air Force. I've never seen a more professional response to an emergency situation." The praise was gratifying, but Sarah knew that the real test had been internal. She had faced her deepest fears and greatest challenges, and she had emerged stronger. The storm had been external. The real battle had been against the voices of doubt that had haunted her throughout her career. Today, she had finally silenced them forever, but as Sarah would soon discover, surviving the storm was only the beginning. The real consequences of that night, both the challenges and the opportunities, were about to reshape her entire career in ways she never could have imagined. Sarah was about to discover just how dramatically that storm had changed everything. The investigation into the incident began immediately. The Air Force takes aircraft losses seriously, and 2 F-16s destroyed in a single day warranted a comprehensive review. Sarah found herself the subject of intense scrutiny as investigators examined every aspect of the mission, from the initial decision to proceed with the training exercise to the final moments of both landings. The investigation team was led by Colonel Patricia Hayes, a former F-16 pilot herself, who had extensive experience in accident investigation. Colonel Hayes was known for her thoroughness and objectivity, qualities that would be essential in determining what had happened and whether any mistakes had been made. "Captain Chen," Colonel Hayes began during Sarah's formal interview, "I want you to walk me through your decision-making process from the moment you first became aware of the deteriorating weather conditions." Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing that her judgment would be examined in detail. "Ma'am, when we first noticed the weather building, I considered returning to base immediately," Sarah explained. "However, the forecast still showed acceptable conditions for our planned exercise area, and the storm system appeared to be moving slowly enough that we could complete the mission and return safely." Colonel Hayes nodded, making notes. "At what point did you realize the situation was becoming dangerous?" Sarah thought carefully before responding. "When we finished the exercise and turned toward home, I could see that the storm had intensified beyond anything the forecast had predicted. It was moving much faster than expected, and it was positioned directly between us and our base." The investigators spent hours examining weather data, radar tracks, and communications records. They interviewed meteorologists, air traffic controllers, and other personnel who had been involved in the incident. The picture that emerged was of a weather system that had behaved unpredictably, intensifying and moving faster than any forecast had indicated. Meanwhile, Sarah's actions during the crisis were being analyzed by flight safety experts. Her decision to attempt penetration of the storm rather than diverting to an alternate field was controversial. Some argued that she had taken unnecessary risks, while others maintained that she had made the best decision possible given the circumstances. Major Daniels, who had been part of the training exercise, was interviewed extensively about Sarah's performance. "Captain Chien's actions were exemplary," he told the investigators. "She maintained control of the situation throughout the crisis, made sound tactical decisions, and ultimately saved Lieutenant Patterson's life. Her flying skills during the approach and landing were exceptional. The technical analysis of both aircraft revealed the extent of the damage caused by the storm. Sarah's F-16 had suffered multiple system failures, including the catastrophic engine failure that had forced her dead-stick landing. The investigators were amazed that she had been able to maintain control of the aircraft under such conditions. Lieutenant Patterson's aircraft had fared even worse. The hydraulic system failure had left him with minimal control authority, and the investigators concluded that his survival was due in large part to Sarah's guidance and support during the approach. Without Captain Chun's leadership and assistance, the report would later state, Lieutenant Patterson's aircraft would likely have crashed with fatal results. As the investigation continued, Sarah found herself dealing with an unexpected consequence of the incident: media attention. The story of a female pilot landing a damaged fighter jet in a severe storm had captured the public imagination, and reporters were eager to interview her about the experience. Sarah was initially reluctant to speak to the media, preferring to let the official investigation run its course. However, her squadron commander encouraged her to share her story, believing it would help dispel lingering doubts about women in combat roles. "Chun," Colonel Sullivan told her, "your actions speak louder than any argument about women's capabilities in high-stress situations. The public needs to hear your story." The first interview was with a respected aviation journalist who had covered military aviation for decades. Sarah was nervous but determined to represent herself and her profession well. "Captain Chun," the journalist asked, "there are still some who believe that women don't have the physical or emotional strength for combat flying. How do you respond to that?" Sarah's answer was measured and thoughtful. "I think my actions speak for themselves. When faced with a life-or-death situation, I didn't panic or make emotional decisions. I relied on my training, my experience, and my judgment to get both aircraft safely on the ground. That's what any professional pilot, male or female, would do." The journalist pressed further. "But some critics have suggested that your decision to proceed with the mission, despite deteriorating weather, showed poor judgment. How do you respond to that?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had given it considerable thought. "Every pilot makes judgment calls based on the information available at the time," she replied. "The weather forecast showed acceptable conditions, and the storm system developed far more rapidly than anyone predicted. In retrospect, it's easy to say we should have done things differently, but at the time, proceeding with the mission was a reasonable decision based on the available information." The interview was well received, and Sarah found herself in demand from other media outlets. She appeared on television news programs, gave interviews to magazines, and spoke at aviation conferences. Each appearance reinforced the message that her gender had nothing to do with her ability to perform under pressure, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her fellow pilots. The day after the official investigation concluded, Sarah walked into the squadron-ready room to find her colleagues waiting for her. On the wall was a new plaque that read, "Captain Sarah Phoenix Chun, Pilot, Leader, Lifesaver." Major Daniel stepped forward to address the group. "We've all heard the critics say that women don't belong in fighter cockpits, that they'll crack under pressure when the chips are down. Well, I've flown with Phoenix through hell and back, and I can tell you that she's got more guts and skill than most of us will ever have. She's earned her place here 100 times over." The applause that followed was genuine and heartfelt. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her squadron mates, pilots who had initially been skeptical of her abilities, but who now regarded her as one of their own. She had finally achieved what she had been working toward since her first day at the academy: complete acceptance and respect from her peers. But Sarah's journey was far from over. The storm incident had opened doors she never could have imagined, and her next assignment would take her to the very pinnacle of military aviation. Little did she know that her greatest challenges and her most significant achievements still lay ahead. The months following the storm incident brought significant changes to Sarah's career. The Air Force, recognizing her exceptional performance under pressure, fast-tracked her for promotion and additional responsibilities. She was selected for the prestigious Test Pilot School, a program that would prepare her for the most challenging assignments in military aviation. Test Pilot School was located at Edwards Air Force Base in California, the legendary home of experimental flight testing. This was where Chuck Yeager had first broken the sound barrier, where the X-15 rocket plane had pushed the boundaries of spaceflight, and where the most advanced aircraft in the world were put through their paces. Sarah would be joining an elite group of pilots responsible for testing new aircraft and systems before they entered service. The selection for Test Pilot School was highly competitive, with only the best pilots from each service branch being chosen. Sarah was one of only 3 women in her class of 48 students, and she was determined to prove that her selection was based on merit, not quotas or politics. The curriculum at Test Pilot School was intense and demanding. Students learned advanced aerodynamics, flight test techniques, and systems analysis. They flew a variety of aircraft, from vintage fighters to modern jets, each designed to teach specific lessons about flight testing and aircraft performance. The program was designed to produce pilots who could take an untested aircraft and determine its capabilities and limitations. Sarah's first flight at Test Pilot School was in a T-38 Talon, a sleek supersonic trainer that had been used to train generations of military pilots. The mission was to evaluate the aircraft's handling characteristics at various speeds and altitudes, making detailed observations and measurements that would be used to assess the aircraft's performance. "Chun, you're going to love this," her instructor, Major Robert Test Thompson, told her as they prepared for the flight. "Test flying is different from operational flying. You're not just trying to complete a mission. You're trying to understand how the aircraft behaves, what its limits are, and how it responds to different conditions." The flight was a revelation for Sarah. Instead of simply flying the aircraft from point A to point B, she was analyzing every aspect of its performance. She measured how quickly it accelerated, how it handled in turns, how it responded to control inputs. Every maneuver was carefully planned and executed, with detailed observations recorded for later analysis. "Good work, Chun," Major Thompson said after they landed. "You've got the instincts for this kind of work. Test flying requires a different mindset. You need to be part pilot, part engineer, and part scientist. From what I've seen today, you've got all 3. As Sarah progressed through the program, she found herself working on increasingly complex projects. She flew experimental aircraft with advanced avionics systems, evaluated new weapons platforms, and tested modifications to existing aircraft. Each flight was a learning experience, teaching her more about the science of flight and the art of aircraft design. One of her most challenging assignments was testing a modified F-16 equipped with new flight control software. The modifications were designed to improve the aircraft's handling characteristics, but they also introduced new variables that needed to be carefully evaluated. Sarah's job was to determine whether the modifications actually improved performance or created new problems. The test flights were methodical and precise. Sarah flew the aircraft through a series of predetermined maneuvers, measuring its response to control inputs and noting any unusual behavior. She discovered that while the modifications improved handling in some flight regimes, they created stability problems in others. Her detailed reports helped the engineers refine the software before it was approved for operational use, but it was during a test flight of an experimental reconnaissance aircraft that Sarah faced her next major challenge. The aircraft was designed to fly at extremely high altitudes, beyond the reach of most surface-to-air missiles. Sarah's mission was to evaluate its performance at maximum altitude and assess its suitability for operational use. The flight began normally, with Sarah climbing the aircraft to its maximum service ceiling of 70,000 feet. At that altitude, the sky was a deep purple-black, and the curvature of the Earth was clearly visible. The aircraft was performing well, and Sarah was making detailed observations of its handling characteristics. Then, without warning, the aircraft's engine began to surge and lose power. Sarah found herself in a situation eerily similar to the storm incident months earlier, flying a damaged aircraft at high altitude with limited options for recovery. The difference was that this time, she was completely alone, flying an experimental aircraft that had never been tested in an emergency situation. "Edwards Control, this is Test 77, Sarah transmitted, her voice calm and professional despite the growing emergency. "I'm experiencing engine problems at flight level 700, beginning emergency descent and troubleshooting procedures." The response from ground control was immediate and concerned. "Test 77, we copy your emergency. Emergency. Equipment is being positioned. Can you maintain control of the aircraft?" Sarah's answer was confident despite the circumstances. "Affirmative, control. I have control, and I'm working the problem." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She began executing emergency procedures while simultaneously managing the aircraft's descent. The experimental nature of the aircraft meant that some of the normal emergency procedures didn't apply, and she had to improvise based on her understanding of the aircraft's systems. The engine problem was severe, a compressor stall that had damaged internal components and reduced power output to less than 50%. Sarah realized that she would need to make an emergency landing, but the aircraft's experimental systems made even that challenging. The landing gear and flaps were operated by the same hydraulic system that was now running on emergency power. "Edwards Control, Test 77, Sarah transmitted as she continued her descent. "I'm going to need a straight-in approach to runway 04. The aircraft is controllable, but I'll have limited options for maneuvering." The response came back immediately. "Test 77, you're cleared for straight-in approach runway 04, emergency. Equipment is standing by." As Sarah guided the damaged experimental aircraft toward Edwards Air Force Base, she reflected on how different this emergency was from her experience in the storm. This time, the weather was perfect. Clear skies, light winds, and unlimited visibility. The challenge was the aircraft itself, an experimental machine with systems that behaved differently from anything she had flown before. The aircraft's flight manual was still being written, and many of the emergency procedures were theoretical rather than proven. Sarah was essentially writing the book on how to handle this type of emergency as she lived through it. Her detailed observations and actions would become part of the official procedures for future pilots flying this aircraft. "Test 77, this is Edwards Control," came the calm voice of the approach controller. "We show you descending through 30,000 feet. How do you assess your aircraft's condition?" Sarah scanned her instruments before responding. "Control. The engine is running rough but stable. I have normal flight controls, but hydraulic pressure is marginal. I'm planning for a no-flap landing with extended final approach." The decision to attempt a no-flap landing was based on her assessment that using the flaps might overstress the hydraulic system and cause a complete failure. It would mean a faster approach speed and a longer landing roll, but it was the safest option given the aircraft's condition. As she descended through 20,000 feet, Sarah began to notice other symptoms of the engine problem. The exhaust gas temperature was climbing toward the red line, indicating that the engine was running hotter than normal. She adjusted the throttle setting to reduce the temperature while maintaining enough power to continue the descent. Major Thompson, her instructor, was monitoring the situation from the control tower. "Sarah's handling this perfectly," he told the other instructors gathered to watch the emergency landing. "She's staying calm, following procedures, and making smart decisions. This is exactly what we train them to do." The approach to Edwards was flown over the Mojave Desert, giving Sarah plenty of room to maneuver if something went wrong. The landscape below was stark and beautiful, endless miles of sand and rock stretching to the horizon. It was the same terrain that had witnessed countless historic flights, from the X-1's first supersonic flight to the Space Shuttle's return from orbit. At 10,000 feet, Sarah began her final approach preparations. She extended the landing gear, confirmed that all 3 wheels were down and locked, and adjusted her approach speed for the no-flap landing. The aircraft felt stable and controllable, giving her confidence that she could complete the landing successfully. Test 77, you're looking good, the approach controller transmitted. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. You're cleared to land runway 04. Sarah acknowledged the clearance and continued her descent toward the runway. The massive concrete strip stretched out before her, more than enough length to accommodate her faster approach speed. As she crossed the runway threshold, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of a successful approach. The aircraft was stable, the speed was correct, and the runway was directly ahead. She reduced power and began the landing flare, pulling the nose up slightly to cushion the touchdown. The landing was firm but controlled. Sarah immediately applied the brakes and deployed the drag chute, bringing the aircraft to a stop in the middle of the runway. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as she shut down the engine and completed the post-flight checklist. "Outstanding work, Chen," Major Thompson radioed from the tower. "Textbook emergency handling from start to finish. How do you feel?" Sarah's response was characteristic of her professional demeanor. "Glad to be on the ground, sir." The aircraft performed well considering the circumstances. The incident became another milestone in Sarah's growing reputation as an exceptional pilot. Her calm handling of the emergency, her sound decision-making, and her professional demeanor throughout the crisis impressed everyone who witnessed it. The detailed report she wrote about the incident became required reading for other test pilots and contributed to improved emergency procedures for the experimental aircraft. But for Sarah, the most significant aspect of the incident was personal. She had faced another high-stress emergency situation and had responded with the same professionalism and skill that had characterized her performance in the storm. The voices of doubt that had once questioned her ability to handle pressure were now completely silent. Her classmates at test pilot school were unanimous in their praise. "Sarah's the kind of pilot you want on your wing," said Captain Mike Rodriguez, a fellow student. "She doesn't panic, she doesn't make mistakes, and she always looks out for everyone else. Gender has nothing to do with it, she's just a damn good pilot." The successful completion of test pilot school opened new doors for Sarah's career. She was selected for assignment to the F-35 Lightning II test program, where she would be evaluating the Air Force's newest fighter aircraft. The F-35 was the most advanced fighter ever built, incorporating stealth technology, advanced sensors, and networked warfare capabilities. Sarah's first flight in the F-35 was scheduled for a crisp October morning at Edwards Air Force Base. The aircraft sat on the ramp like a sleek, gray Predator, its angular surfaces designed to deflect radar waves and make it nearly invisible to enemy sensors. This was the culmination of decades of aerospace engineering, and Sarah would be one of the first pilots to evaluate its capabilities. "Chun, you ready for this?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Martinez, the F-35 test program director. "This aircraft represents the future of air combat. Your job is to help us make sure it's ready for operational use." Sarah's response was confident and enthusiastic. "Yes, ma'am. I've been preparing for this my whole career." The pre-flight briefing covered the aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and test objectives. Sarah studied the information carefully, knowing that her performance would be scrutinized by engineers, military officials, and defense contractors. The F-35 program was one of the most expensive military projects in history, and every test flight was crucial to its success. As Sarah strapped into the F-35's cockpit, She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the Sung-the small-town girl who dreamed of flying to the accomplished test pilot about to evaluate the world's most advanced fighter, she had overcome every obstacle and exceeded every expectation. The pre-flight checks were complete, the tower had cleared her for takeoff, and history was about to be made. But as Sarah was about to discover, even in the most advanced aircraft ever built, the ultimate test would still come down to the skill, judgment, and unbreakable determination of the pilot in the cockpit. That test of pilot skill, judgment, and determination was about to begin in the most sophisticated cockpit ever created. The F-35 Lightning II represented everything Sarah had worked toward in her career. This wasn't just another aircraft. It was a technological marvel that would define air combat for the next generation. As she completed her pre-flight checks, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with being one of the first pilots to evaluate this revolutionary machine. Lightning 77, you're cleared for takeoff, came the familiar voice of Edwards Control. Sarah advanced the throttle, feeling the tremendous power of the F-35's advanced engine. The aircraft accelerated rapidly down the runway, and within seconds, she was airborne and climbing toward the test area. The F-35's cockpit was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Instead of traditional gauges and instruments, she was surrounded by high-resolution displays that showed everything from engine parameters to tactical information. The helmet-mounted display system projected critical information directly into her field of view, allowing her to see through the aircraft's skin using advanced sensors. "This is incredible," Sarah transmitted to the test control room. "The situational awareness this aircraft provides is beyond anything I've ever experienced. I can see in all directions simultaneously, and the sensor fusion is seamless." The response came back from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. "Roger that, Lightning 77. That's exactly what we hoped to hear." The test flight proceeded through a series of predetermined maneuvers designed to evaluate the aircraft's handling characteristics. Sarah flew the F-35 through basic maneuvers, high G-turns, and simulated combat scenarios. The aircraft responded beautifully to her inputs, demonstrating the kind of performance that would give American pilots a decisive advantage in air combat. But it was during the stealth evaluation portion of the flight that Sarah truly appreciated the F-35's capabilities. The aircraft's advanced stealth technology made it nearly invisible to radar, allowing it to penetrate enemy airspace undetected. Sarah flew simulated attack missions against ground targets, demonstrating how the F-35 could strike targets and escape before enemy defenses could respond. "Lightning 77, this is Control," came the transmission as Sarah completed the stealth evaluation. "Outstanding work. Your performance today has exceeded all expectations. How do you assess the aircraft's capabilities?" Sarah's response was enthusiastic. "Control, this aircraft is a game changer. The combination of stealth, sensors, and performance creates capabilities that no enemy can match." The successful test flight was another milestone in Sarah's career, but it also represented something more significant. She had become one of the first pilots to evaluate the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, contributing to its development and eventual deployment to operational squadrons. Her expertise and judgment were now influencing the future of military aviation. As Sarah's career progressed, she found herself in increasingly important positions. She was promoted to major and selected for command of a test squadron responsible for evaluating new aircraft and systems before they entered service. Her reputation for professionalism, technical expertise, and leadership had made her one of the most respected pilots in the Air Force. The command position brought new challenges and responsibilities. Sarah was now responsible for the safety and performance of dozens of test pilots, as well as the success of multiple test programs. She approached the job with the same dedication and attention to detail that had characterized her entire career. Major Chen, said General Patricia Williams, the commander of the Air Force Test Center, during Sarah's change of command ceremony. "You represent the very best of what our Air Force stands for. Your technical expertise, leadership ability, and unwavering professionalism have made you an invaluable asset to our test community. I know you'll continue to excel in your new position." The ceremony was attended by Sarah's family, including her parents, who had traveled from Oregon to witness their daughter's achievement. Her father, the mechanic who had first introduced her to aviation, wiped away tears as he watched Sarah accept command of the squadron. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," he told her afterward. "You've achieved everything you dreamed of and more. You've proven that with determination and hard work, anything is possible." Sarah hugged her father, remembering all the times he had encouraged her dreams when others had expressed doubts. As Sarah settled into her new command, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the academy cadet who had been told she would crack under pressure, to the accomplished test pilot and squadron commander, she had defied every expectation and overcome every obstacle. The storm incident, which had once seemed like a crisis that could end her career, had instead become the defining moment that proved her capabilities. Her dead-stick landing in impossible conditions had silenced the critics and demonstrated that leadership, skill, and determination had nothing to do with gender. Sarah's story continued to inspire young women considering military aviation careers. She regularly spoke at schools, aviation events, and military ceremonies, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to pursue their dreams. Her message was always the same: with proper preparation, dedication, and the courage to persevere through challenges, anyone could achieve their goals. The squadron she commanded went on to achieve unprecedented success, setting new standards for safety and efficiency in flight testing. Under her leadership, they evaluated dozens of new aircraft and systems, contributing to the Air Force's technological superiority. Sarah's approach to leadership emphasized excellence, teamwork, and the importance of learning from every experience. Years later, as Sarah looked back on her career, she realized that the storm had been more than just a test of her flying skills. It had been a crucible that had forged her into the leader she had become. The experience had taught her that pressure didn't break people, it revealed their true character. And in that storm, flying a damaged aircraft through impossible conditions, she had discovered that she was made of stronger stuff than anyone had imagined. The young woman who had once been told she would crack under pressure had instead proven that she was unbreakable. Her legacy would inspire generations of pilots, male and female, to pursue excellence and never accept limitations imposed by others. In the end, Sarah Chen had not just landed a damaged F-16 in a storm, she had shattered every barrier that had stood in her way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.